right, let's do a quick recap so we can get to the budgeting stuff. So we did one, it won't be comfortable. That was budgeting at a high level. Is your mind made up? And what information you would really need to start gathering to put a budget together. Then we talked about memberships and subscriptions, but really that was a focus on cutting some things out, right? Like, hey, not the stuff that is negotiable, let's get rid of it, right? And then we talked about prioritizing and rearranging what is left. So now we should be left with the meat. And now we're going to talk about the very last two things that need to be added now that we've done all of that, right? And so again, today is about personal allowance and savings. So let's start off with personal allowance, because we strongly recommend that that be defined first. Why? Because personal allowance does have a cap, meaning that it's consistent, it stays the same no matter what. Whereas once we move to savings is where really we want to maximize, meaning that, hey, if it can be 500, let's do that, right? Just depending on what's left over. So again, personal allowance is, we're going to define that, put a number to it, add it to our budget, just like a bill. And define personal allowance for us real quick, just in case people are like, okay, what are you even talking about?
Personal allowance, I define it as like your wants or your leisure, your pleasure things. So like we say, if whether your thing is coffee, Starbucks, donuts, whatever, things like that. I'm saying whatever it is, whatever you're eating, eating out at a fancy restaurant or something like that, those things aren't a part of your budget, or it shouldn't be. Buying clothes or anything. You want that to be in your personal allowance, because these are not needs. These are wants, and is your goal right now, which most of us are, is to stop living paycheck to paycheck, to get out of debt. And so that's why you categorize everything. That's why you get a personal allowance, because you're now going to save, or you're going to knock off debt so that you can get financially free. So that's your personal allowance. If you, any sort of entertainment, going to a game, anything like that, you're going to use that personal allowance to save up to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. Or if you're trying to buy something that's pricey, you're going to use that personal allowance to do that. And same thing, like I said, Starbucks or whatever, you're going to stop going to Starbucks every day, and we're going to scale back and go once or twice a week, and it's going to be within that personal allowance.
Yeah, so personal allowance is, because in a budget we do define groceries, we do define gas, right? Like those are not,
everything is already accounted for.
We
all of
do
those necessities.
Exactly, because those are necessities. However, when we switch gears to eating out, right? Like we know we have groceries at home because we've accounted for it in the budget. So now when we talk about, well, it's the weekend, I want to go out to eat, that is separate from your grocery money, right? So two different things. Also, because again, it helps build discipline. It could also be getting my nails done, right? Because we talked about, and just coming from, my perspective and kind of when this first started, and what I mentioned before is, it could be getting your nails done. It could be getting your eyebrows done. Let's just say, a lot of us do that, but like all of that needs to be coming out of that. You can't add all of those nice to haves into your budget and then say you don't have a savings. So whatever you really feel like, well, it is a nice to have, but I'm so used to doing it, you have to figure out how to pull it out of the personal budget, right? The one point I think we want to drive here is your personal allowance does have a cap, right? It should require you to be disciplined, right? And it should challenge you. So it does not help to have if you're like, oh, well, I have so much room in my budget that I have a $500 personal allowance. That's not what we're talking about here, right? Like we're not going to tell you the amount. I'm going to give a few examples of some that I know of, right? And even when I first started, which we briefly mentioned in another episode. But the point is that it should challenge you. If you find that you're not having to make any lifestyle changes or even think about how often you're doing something, it's probably too high, right? And again, the goal is a bigger savings. So this needs to have a cap. So what do I mean? Okay, let me give two examples. when we first ever got on like a full budget, shortly after, it might have been right after we got married, actually. This guy doesn't play. But was it right? I think it was like right after, because we pretty much started saving for the house right away.
I would say, I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
You
So
wanted the house, we were like,
yeah.
all right, well, this is the plan.
Yep. So we got married. I moved in with him to his apartment, and then we were like, all right, we want to buy a house in a year. And so that caused us to just, this whole journey just kind of kicked off. At that time, I am a very transparent person, so I don't like, I overshare, and I think, if it blesses other people, then that's great. But at the time, I was making $18 an hour. I was working full time, so just for anyone who wants to do any math there. And what we decided my personal allowance would be at that time was $75 a week. So basically, I was getting paid bi-weekly every 2 weeks, and you would set aside, or I would, however we had the bank account set up at that time, 150, and I would do the 75 every week. I feel like when I tell that story, everyone's like, girl, 75 is great. And I'm like, do it. Do it, and then let me know, then we can really talk. Because again, at that time, we weren't working from home. At that time, I was drinking a lot of coffee. At that time, I was getting my nails done faithfully, upkeeping a lot of other things, eyebrows, all the things. And so $75 a week just started to feel like he wanted me to survive off of $5. It was rough at first. But I believed in it. And so we stuck to it. And thank God, like, I'm on the other side now of it, where I'm like, no guys, like, this stuff really works. So that's one example. But I really wanted to highlight someone that we've been working with, that she is well into six figures. Her take-home pay, and again, this is just because we work with people's finances. She's okay with us sharing, but her take-home pay every week, she gets paid weekly, is $2,400. So she's well into six figures, and her personal allowance is also $75 a week. And so the reason I thought that was important, and I wanted to highlight that, is because our natural selves would say, well, if I made a certain amount, then I can increase my budget, right? And we've come across a lot of people that have that mentality that, oh, I got an increase, so let me increase my personal budget. And we would just caution against that. We want to be on the conservative side. It needs to stretch you. This is all about discipline. And so I love that she does have the wiggle room to have a much higher personal allowance, but she doesn't. And the crazy part about it too is, like, we do weekly check-ins, and it burdens her when she goes over slightly, which, she has a kid and everything. So again, you can't always account for every single thing, right? Especially when you have kids and stuff. But she is very, very good and very passionate about sticking to her personal allowance. And so I share that just to say, your income should not be how you gauge what your personal allowance is. This is not I make, $200,000, therefore mine should be X times bigger than someone who makes 18 an hour. No, this is, again, we don't want to owe anything, like anyone anything at some point, right? And that's going to require, like, hey, how low can you go? I feel like that's a good challenge, right? It's like, man, if 75 is nothing to you, go to 50 a week. Like, really challenge yourself and see that discipline. And then you realize, like, I've gotten to the point where now I'm like, what was I spending my money on? Like, now not, and that's a topic for another day, like how we do our finances today, because I low-key don't have a personal allowance, but it just works. It's crazy. Anyway, what do you want to share about that? Anything?
No, I mean, I think you drilled everything. The personal allowance is supposed to stretch you, and kind of like what you were saying, and this is what we tell people. Well, your goal matters. Your personal allowance, we kind of give you, as the finance guy, what I do with the clients is I give you the scenarios. I give you so many different scenarios, and I tell you, like, with this personal allowance, you'll be here in 6 months or a year or whatever. With this one, you'll be here, here, and here, or whatever. So I give you like 3 different cases where it's one really extreme, but you will also see, like, whoa, I could be possibly debt free in a year with this. Or we can scale it back to a medium where it's like, it may add some months, but because I also help the client. I want you to feel comfortable, and I want you to where it doesn't feel like a prison. Because doing a budget, a lot of people fail because they're not comfortable with it. They're not at peace with it, and it is causing them to do things that it's just not fun. Anytime where you're not into doing something, you're probably gonna stop doing it. So that with the example, when we set up the personal allowance, but on the flip side, we also showed her, like, you'll be at 75, but this is the type of payoff you're gonna be able to do, and this is what you're gonna look like a year from now. And that's where she got excited about it, and that's why it's like, okay, I can stick to that because pay car off, we're gonna pay, loans off, credit card, whatever, everything off. So that's exciting when you can see a plan, and you have the goals in place, and you have the reason, the why behind you're doing a personal allowance. You're doing it because the goals, and that's the why. So it's like, it's easy to stick to it because I have goals and I know where I'm gonna be a year from now if I stick to this. And the other thing is kind of like she said, that when you first set up your budget, and I always tell the clients this is great because this is gonna be the toughest it's ever gonna be. Because we're coming in and we're setting up a budget where your expenses off of the income you're making right now. Your personal allowance is set up off the income you're making right now, which most people get a merit increase. Most people get a bonus or something. So again, like she said, when you do get that increase, that whole increase or that whole bonus is gonna go straight into savings. Or straight into paying off a bill or a debt faster, because your budget was set up off of whatever income you had at that amount. So if you was making, let's just say 50,000 right now, and then say if you did get you moved jobs or something, and now you got an increase, you got a promotion, and now you're making 70,000, that 20,000, your bills was set up off the 50,000. So that entire 20,000 can go straight into paying off a car, or house, knocking off house or whatever, or anything. So that's what I like telling clients, because it is tough to start a budget, but I just tell them this is the worst it's gonna be right here in the beginning. Because again, you're gonna get increases, merit increases with inflation or whatever, like things, your income is gonna increase even if you stay at the same job, or even if because you always, even when you move jobs, you're moving to try to go up. It's very rare that somebody will move and go down, unless it's a situation where you might be stressed out or something, so you might scale back on pay and go to a lower job. But most times you're going to a higher paying job. So that's also the excitement falling into the personal allowance.
Yeah. The last point I'll make really quickly, and then we need to move on to savings, is one concern, and something that we had to talk through, was like, okay, but what if I want to do something that costs more than $75, right? Because again, mine was $75 a week. And so really our tip there is those $75 or whatever your actual personal allowance is, you can save it. So if you only if yours was $75 every week, but you only spent $50,
it rolls over.
You roll it over. You don't have to go and dump it into your savings or anything else, right? Because the savings is going to already be in motion. But you save it. You can save it. Even if you're like, hey, I really want to go to a Hornets game, or, whatever game. You can figure out how long you need to save your personal allowance to be able to afford it. So again, it's not to be miserable. It's to put in that discipline and do it the right way, where everything else is maintained. You don't even have to think twice about your bills, right? Now the effort just goes into saving your personal allowance to do what you want to do with it, or a big gift, or whatever it might be. All right, let's move to savings. So again, we have a whole budget in place. We've just put a figure to our personal allowance, and now we're going to move to savings, right? Because last episode, we talked about making every paycheck, if possible, in the green, meaning that you have more money coming in than going out for that particular paycheck, right? So now we've defined the personal allowance, and essentially, like, to put it very practically, all the money that is left over after all the bills come out and your personal allowance is taken out, everything else goes to savings. So savings is the one that is not defined, that doesn't have a cap. It's not extra money, right, for us to spend, because we just put spending money to the side, and that does have a cap. So now if I have $500 left over after I paid all my bills for that paycheck, and my personal allowance is also taken out, if I have $500 left, I'm moving that entire thing to savings, like the entire thing. And we don't think about it twice, right? Like that's really it. A savings truly is non-negotiable, and we're trying to throw everything that we can into it, because next episode we're going to start talking about, all right, what debts do you have? How do we tackle them? We're going to start paying stuff off once we can accumulate some of the savings. Anything you want to say about savings? I know a couple things like the high yield savings, emergency fund. Just, I know you wanted to highlight some of those things, if you still want to. Completely up to you.
No, like I said, savings, you want to move from a traditional bank, traditional savings account to either a high yielding. There are CDs out there, but that's something different. I would recommend doing a high yielding savings because it's less restrictions. And really, like you said, we're gonna dive more into it probably next episode. But what you want to keep your emergency fund, whatever that amount is, which the emergency fund is different for every family, every individual. So you want to keep that emergency fund into a high yielding, and once you have capped, there is a cap on the emergency fund. Once you have capped that emergency fund, then you want to, like I said, we're going to get into debt and what to pay off, and when to do it and all of that. But there will come a time that you're not putting it into savings, and you want to now start, if it's a car, if it's your house or whatever, you're gonna now start not only make your monthly payment, but you're gonna also make a principal payment to pay down that debt faster. So that's the only thing that I would say.
I was gonna say, so we'll go in depth into that part of it next episode. I think the part about the emergency fund, for just anyone who doesn't know, right? Because I know we talk about this day in and day out, but from a very practical perspective, in the beginning, your savings and your emergency fund are technically the same. An emergency fund is really a limit to say, okay, like you've heard people say, have at least 6 months of expenses saved up just in case something happens, just in case you lose your job, whatever it might be. So again, we're not telling you all what it should be. Determine that on your own, and then say, okay, my savings should never be below $2,000 because that's the threshold that you decided for your bills and your family. If and when that's the case, what he's saying is, and you can come back in, I'm just trying to make sure we break it down a little bit, is once I hit $2,000, everything after that goes into my savings is now going to be thrown to, again, next episode, which is starting to pay debts off. So if I get to the point where I have $4,000 in my savings, but I know $2,000 is my emergency fund, what can I pay off with those $2,000? So that's really what you were kind of trying to highlight. But just for people that don't, I didn't know about this stuff.
Right,
so
no,
right. I just didn't know.
I said emergency fund and didn't. I should have defined it.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'm just like, hey, I didn't know anything.
That's good.
So.
That's good. Because I do be talking, using things.
Yeah. And so he also does have many videos that he releases on Wednesdays that highlight a high yield savings account. But again, if I wasn't sitting here, I wouldn't really know what that means, and maybe you haven't seen those videos. So I just want to take a quick moment to highlight that also. So if you have, if you bank with someone like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, like just those traditional large banks, you're not really earning anything on your savings account, right? It's usually something that you just kind of opened up along with your checking account. But there are other banks, and we're transparent about kind of where we have some of our funds. So we have our savings account, within the last couple of months, we switched it over because we had it at Bank of America, our savings, and then we moved it over to where? Capital One. We moved it over to Capital One, but the reason that we did that is because Capital One has a high yield savings account It's the exact same thing as what we had with Bank of America. It's still free. It doesn't require us to keep any certain amount of money in there. Nothing changed other than the fact that we earn a higher interest rate, which is why it qualifies as a high yield savings account. So I think right now, if it hasn't changed, our rate with Capital One is like a 4.3%, right? And so where our money was literally not earning us anything with Bank of America, after we moved it to Capital One, how much did we get right now? Like a month. Capital One literally deposits money into our savings account every single month.
Every month.
And it's like,
I'll say, I don't know.
close to 200.
Oh, per month. Yeah,
monthly.
Yeah,
so they're literally paying us $200 a month to have our money sitting there. And we had the same money with Bank of America doing nothing.
Versus Bank of America, I think we made 31 cents, 35 cents. Versus, this Capital One, just last month, we made $200. So,
yeah. So I just wanted to highlight that because, again, if you're like me, I didn't know about any of this. We don't expect people to know about all of this, but go look for it. Again, ours is with Capital One. There are several out there, but some of them do have limits. They say, hey, if we give you this interest rate, you have to keep at least $5,000 with us. We weren't interested in any sort of limits like that because we care more about owing no one, how do I say? Like, we don't want to owe anyone anything. So I want to move my money whenever I want to, sort of thing. And so, yeah, Capital One, completely free. It costs us nothing. And they're just depositing $200 into our account every month. So that's what a high yield savings account is. Most of them are free. And so, again, we don't earn anything from telling you this, but it's just good to know, like, you know, it's a resource.
I'm just gonna say the one thing when looking into them, and another reason why we went with Capital One is because of compound interest, and they pay out monthly. So that balance is gonna increase every month, and we're gonna start to gain interest on that new balance. So that's something else, because some of the other institutions may do like quarterly, biannually, or annually, and this is where that monthly, it makes a difference. It might not be much, but it does make a difference. And it just does feel good to look every month. At the end of the month, here's another, however much you want to earn in interest. So that is something to look at when you are looking through them and choosing.
Yep. The last point we wanted to make, and this is kind of, it's relative because I feel like it can vary depending on people's situation. Please, the goal here would be not to be taking money out of your savings account. This is not an account, and I think just from growing up, right, and remembering like, oh, I want to do X thing, I want to go on a trip, and if I knew I had money is sitting in my savings account, that would just be like, all right, well, I'm gonna take $500 and book this thing. Don't do that. I'm kind of pleading with you guys not to do that. Stick with it. Keep going. Let's pay off all your debts. And hey, once we're there, that's a different story, right? But right now that we're putting in the discipline, right now that we're putting in a budget, and we're really trying to get to a point where we have a savings, the goal would be not to take out of it, unless, again, we're talking only about the emergency fund and something goes out, right? Like your car needs to be repaired. Well, that's what the emergency fund is for. But don't pull out of your savings account. It really needs to sit there, unless we're talking about, again, next episode, which is paying debts off.